I am pleased to welcome Elizabeth Silver to talk about her new novel, The Majority, which is based loosely on the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and framed as the unpublished memoirs of its protagonist, Sylvia Olin Bernstein. The Los Angeles Times has called this an important, quiet novel, and Publishers Weekly notes that Ginsburg's many admirers will be captivated by her literary counterpart. Silver is the author of 2 previous books, The Execution of Noah P. Singleton and the memoir The Tincture of Time, a memoir of medical uncertainty. Her work has appeared in New York Magazine, Harper's Bazaar, The Washington Post, and McSweeney's. She currently teaches creative writing at UCLA and is the founder and director of Onward Literary, and she lives in LA with her family. Silver will be in conversation with Angie Kim. Kim is the author of the award-winning Miracle Creek, and it was named the best book of the year by Time, The Washington Post, Kirkus, The Today Show, and on, many others. And her forthcoming novel, Happiness Falls, will be out at the end of August, and she'll be having an event here on September 27th. One other note is that they're both lawyers or former lawyers, and so this should make this an especially interesting conversation. So without further ado, please welcome to Politics and Prose, Elizabeth Silver and Angie Kim.
Yay, what a great introduction. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for coming out today despite the thunderstorm warning. So now you guys are looking scared. Sorry, did not mean to scare you. And thank you so much for coming all this way from LA. I'm so excited to be in conversation with you about this amazing novel.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be in conversation with you. It is a great, great honor and joy to be able to chat with you about it. So thank you, and thank you to all of you for coming out.
Yay. Okay, so I wanted to start off just by talking about how it came out only 2 weeks ago, and I have been seeing so many amazing things about it in the press. So I just wanted to sort of give the audience a little bit of a taste, which we already got a little bit in the intro. But Beth Ann Patrick, who is one of the DC's, reviewers, who also comes here quite a lot. I'm sure some of you know her, wrote your amazing review for the LA Times. And she talked about how Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legend lives on in this stealthily devastating story. And she called it an important novel. I love that so much. And the Washington Post also talked about how nuanced your book is at dramatizing the difficulties that women have in reconciling their careers, especially with their families and their family life, especially motherhood. So I thought that was amazing. Book Page, I think this is probably my favorite review, said that it was engrossing and thought-provoking, and also talked about The Majority being more than an entertaining read, although it is certainly that. It's a profound contemplation of how women are treated by the law and how they administer the law. And Publishers Weekly also called it incisive and said Ginsburg's many admirers will be captivated by her literary counterpart. So I'm just so thrilled to be in conversation with you about this. Okay, so I wanted to first start by asking you to please tell us the origin story and also just a quick elevator pitch for those in the audience who may not have been able to read it in the last 2 weeks that it's been out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that amazing intro. It feels kind of crazy to hear all that together, so thank you. So the book is called The Majority, and it's an imagining of the life of a first female Supreme Court justice in America. So in many ways, it takes a form of a fictional memoir, and takes place over the second half of the 20th century. It's kind of going very much from the end of the 40s all the way through the 80s. So it takes place almost 50 years and really covers a lot of kind of third wave feminism, third wave of the women's movement, but really is ultimately this intimate story about motherhood, about marriage, about friendship, female friendship, mentorhood, and following one woman's path on her way to what I think is the closest thing we have to a modern throne with lifetime appointments. And so it follows this woman named Sylvia Olin Bernstein on her path, and it was just a joy to write.
So what made you think about this particular story and this particular character, and also the genre, which, a fictional memoir, which kind of marries the two books that you've written previously? So your first book was, fiction, and your second book was memoir. And this is kind of, a joining, a melding of those two things. Is that sort of what came to you first, the sort of genre or the subject matter? Tell us the origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this book has had a long gestation period. It's been about 6 years in the making. And so...
yeah, you told me, so she and I met for the first time around that time, right?
Exactly. About
6 years ago in DC at AWP, which is this big conference. And you told me that you were working on it back then.
I was working on it for a very, very long time. And I even sold it to a publisher before Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. So I'd been working on the book for a really long time. But what was happening, so it hit me that I was interested in writing this book when I had a 1-year-old. I was a new mother, and I had noticed that so many people started treating me differently professionally the minute I became a mother. And I didn't feel the gender difference as much as a child of the 90s and the 80s. My parents treated us equally, my brother and sister. There wasn't any different expectations of me as a girl or a boy. But the minute I became a mother, that's when everything changed. And I didn't feel it as much necessarily as a lawyer, but I saw it. There was some point around the age of 30, 35 that things changed. Things were pretty gender equal in terms of matriculation into school and first jobs, but at that age, it changed. And I was really interested in that. I had a 1-year-old at the time, and I was in San Diego promoting my second book, the memoir, and I had been working on this historical novel for maybe a year, and it was centered on like this footnote in history, and I devoted a lot of time to it, but all of a sudden I couldn't get this idea out of my head about how women were treated differently in the workplace. And I thought, I wonder about people like some of my idols, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You have Sandra Day O'Connor. As somebody who had practiced law and went to law school, these are the women who I looked to with admiration and that I related to. Well, not related to totally, but had some sort of connection to. And I thought, well, do they ever come back and feel doubt? Do they ever come back and feel regret? Because they're put out there as these icons of power and strength and admiration, and that's what the world looks at. Those are the biographies that we're given. But when maybe they come home and they don't feel that way, I wanted to know that story. I wanted to know what was on the cutting room floor that didn't make it to the biography.
So were you still practicing law at that time too? Or had you transitioned fully into becoming a writer?
Yeah. I feel like I've had a little bit of a different path than some of the writer/lawyers out there, because I feel like I can't say I'm a former. I feel like I'm an intermittent lawyer in the sense that I got my MFA in creative writing first, and then I went to law school because I didn't know if I was going to publish, and I feel like I needed a job, and so I was kind of always on and off, and so at that point I was pretty much full-time writing, but then I went back and forth with part-time, and now I do like pro bono stuff. So it's always kind of, I keep a foot in there, and I do a lot of legal journalism, but it's always it's intermittent.
Yeah. Okay. That's so interesting to me because I started out in law, and then I gave it up entirely because I was kind of disgusted with it after like a couple of years in my 20s. So
I think you probably practiced longer than I didn't practice all that long, like consistently.
Yeah, I practiced for 4 years, and then I went into and then I let my license lapse and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. Okay. So, but back to this. I feel like it's just so interesting to me because one of the things that is so beautiful about this novel is the voice that you tell the story with, because it is by a very powerful woman. And it's her story that she tells to us. And there's so much of an intimacy in the voice that she tells us, her own story. I was wondering, would you mind reading a little bit for us from the beginning?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. So the section I'm going to read it's the prologue. So it really sets up the whole book and the voice. And so although it is framed as this memoir of this 80-something-year-old woman, it really it follows her over her teenage years, her 20s, her 30s, and her 40s. And this is how it begins. Found in the desk of the late Sylvia Olin Bernstein, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States of America. Half of the United States is waiting for me to die. The other half stands by, candles in hand, praying for me to hang on. At least that's what they tell me. At least that's what they say, but people never really want what they think they want. Every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday from October through April, the main doors of the Supreme Court open at 8. There are only 50 seats available for the general public, and by 9:30 a.m., those eager visitors who waited outside for hours will have secured most of them. Sometimes, when nobody's there, I walk into the main courtroom to sit in the back of the gallery. The perspective is different, almost more ominous. From there, I can see 4 marble columns standing tall before deep mahogany curtains edged in gold. When I was younger, I used to stare at the curtains in pictures and later in person, sometimes wanting to hide in them. Now I know better than to hide. On the days we have argument, a court crier pushes the button, warning the crowd that there are 5 minutes to prepare and take a seat. The 9 of us wait in the robing room backstage where no one can visit, beginning the process of coming out into the courtroom. We have a private pre-game ritual, a rotating handshake among all 9 of us as if to say, yes, we are all in this together. Everyone takes part in this tradition, now between 6 men and 3 women who sometimes like each other and sometimes hate each other when the robe is on and tolerate each other when it's off. The court crier opens his mouth. Oyez, oyez, oyez. We walk out of the robing room to take our places behind our specific chairs at the bench. Mine is marked with a tiny gold plaque carved with the initials S.O.B. I take my seat. The Chief Justice glances to either side and picks up his gavel, slamming the wood with a single pound. It pierces the silence as I scan the gallery. My eyes are old, though. They don't always see what's in front of them. My hair has faded from the yellow, stubborn blonde of my youth, and I've lost some of my height. Though having started at 5 feet 11 inches, I'm still taller than most of the men who've surrounded me for decades. As arguments open, all eyes are on me, wondering what I'm thinking. But it's my own eyes, still a clear light blue, that are the first to reveal the truth. If you look closely enough, you might have to reconsider everything you know about me, everything you thought you knew about the first female Supreme Court Justice of the United States of America, the Honorable Justice Sylvia Olin Bernstein. The first time I sat in that chair, I felt an unnecessary distance from a breathing life, as if I were meant to be protected by an older code. Outside, people wave signs of praise, of hate, of hope that the contemptuous S.O.B might make a change. I hated the name. Just call me bitch, I wanted to say. I'm nobody's son. You see, everybody thinks that I broke the rules, but I didn't. Not really. I just oiled them up a bit for everyone else. But biographers want to present me like that. Pretty but rough, demanding but kind. A model for how to get to the top as a woman and be remembered in history with elegance and idealism. This is the true story, though. I wouldn't be here if I had the luck of my cousin Mariana, or if I'd fought the fight like my friend Linda. Still, history chooses whom to crown an iconoclast, whether they deserve it or not. But history is only as good as the historians, and I'm no longer trusting them to tell my story. I'll stop there. Thank you.
So good. I love it. I remember reading that and being like, okay, no matter what this voice is going to tell me, I just am all in. I'm like ready to listen. So I wanted to, okay, so since this, I'm reading through my questions, and since that section had the S.O.B. in it, I'm going to ask you this question first, even though it's not the first one that I thought of, which is, so her name is Sylvia Olin Bernstein, and she's called the contemptuous S.O.B. And, you know, it's kind of in comparison, and there's a little wink nod to the notorious RBG for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, of course. And I just wanted to ask, did you come up with those with her name specifically because of that acronym?
My sister was just asking me this in the car drive over here. And, you know, I wish I could say there was a specific moment that I remember coming up with it, but no, it just kind of happened at the same time. I was Olin is after my mother's maiden name. Sylvia, Sylvia just feels like a woman of that generation. Yeah. And it's kind of similar to my last name. Yeah. And then Bernstein, it just kind of fit. And so it came together, and then the contemptuous part came about. So the contemptuous part comes about, this isn't giving too much away, but from a contempt of court arrest that Sylvia has when she's very young and a very young lawyer in law school. Yeah. And so it just kind of it kind of takes hold of her over the course of her life, and she's not happy about it. No. And, you know, and becomes a motif that sort of goes through the story, and it's really, really fun to see. And I sort of thought, you know, just as a novelist, I have picked certain characters' names because I thought, you know what, that would really be very playful here, you know, in that scene. And I just thought, oh, I wonder if she did that. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so anyway, so let's talk about research. So this is your second novel. This is your third book. This is historical fiction of sorts in some ways. I mean, this is a fictional character, so it's not a historical figure. And, you know, you have been pretty clear about this is, you know, inspired by RBG's life in some ways, but this character is the first female Supreme Court justice, which would be more like Sandra Day O'Connor. Mm-hmm. So, but of course she's Catholic, not, you know, Jewish, which is a huge part of the story. And so just tell us a little bit about how you came to have this character and also this genre of fictionalized memoir and how it differs in your mind from historical fiction and why you chose to fictionalize this story rather than just writing a biography of, you know, of either Sandra Day O'Connor or Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ooh, I like that. I haven't been asked that question before.
Really? Oh.
I mean, they've been around that, but not that specific one because, you know, when I was writing this, I didn't think of it as historical fiction. It wasn't until we started looking at marketing that it was like, well, this is a historical novel. I'm like, oh, I guess it is. Yeah. Because it doesn't seem like it's that long ago. And all of the things that I learned and that I explore in this book don't seem like that long ago, like when women couldn't have credit cards in their own name or bank accounts in their own name, or when pregnancy discrimination was in fact legal, was not that long ago. And so I realize that it is technically historical fiction, but it doesn't feel like that to me. I was very inspired by, you know, I kind of like books like American Wife by Curtis Sittenfeld, and books that really kind of, it's a jumping off point. So it's not fictionalizing a real person. It's saying, okay, I'm inspired by this one person, and I'm going to create a completely new character just based on that. And so I think there's a lot of people out there, if anybody's like a SCOTUS junkie or really interested in the Supreme Court, which maybe there are some out there, then you can kind of see little Easter eggs that explore the fact that, okay, she looks a little bit like Sandra Day O'Connor. She obviously has the wink wink to the nickname of RBG. There's a Jewish component, which I mean, as a Jew myself, and that was very important for me to explore.
Of course, right.
She has some jobs that Elena Kagan had. She said a few things that Sonia Sotomayor, kind of in that vein. So it really is an amalgamation of so many people, probably, you know, and I hope somebody that so many women will relate to as well.
No, absolutely. And in your acknowledgments, you're pretty frank about that, because you say, you talk about how, yes, of course, you acknowledge, RBG, but you also talk about all of the other female justices, including some of the ones that might not have the same politics and, might really not be happy about some of the conclusions that are reached here. So I thought that was really, really cool that you did that, and that you were acknowledging the kind of path that these women, regardless of their policies or politics or views, have had on sort of women in general.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we're trying to make a better world, and in different ways, perhaps. But I think that if you're a woman on the Supreme Court, you're a woman on the Supreme Court. And that's no small thing.
Yeah, and also just wanted to just let you know that when I was saying that I feel like this is historical fiction, not because it takes place so long ago, but more just the fact that there is this component that borrows from history, from real life people, even though it is kind of contemporary.
But it's funny that you talk about that, because I have a colleague who I think she wrote a novel set in the 90s, and they categorized it as historical fiction as well, or something in like the early 2000s, and we were just looking at each other like, wait, that's historical fiction now? What does that mean?
Yeah, no, we were just talking about this the other day at a book festival, and we were saying, well, what is the actual definition of historical fiction? Oh, I know. It was Anthony Marra for Mercury Picture Presents. And because his book, takes place in the, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And it's categorized definitely as historical fiction. And we were like, oh, but is it historical fiction if we were born during that time?
And I don't think it's something that we as authors think about when you're writing. Like, I don't think about categorization. I don't think about genre. I just kind of want to think about the story and the characters, get it on the page. And I think other people think about the categorization of it all.
Exactly. So, but back to the question of research and things. So how much of this is based on certain events, and did you feel like because of the inspiration and because the Supreme Court is so highly visible that you felt did you feel a need to sort of stay true to certain things that happened and things like that?
Yeah, so I created this rubric for myself that I stuck to pretty religiously, in the sense that when I'm talking about, like, I think about it as a very intimate, personal story, a domestic story about a woman coming of age, really, in many ways, on her path to power, and what does that look like with herself as a mother, with herself as a friend, with herself as a daughter, as a wife, as a student, as a lawyer. But the backdrop of that really is the law. And so with the setting, if you think of it as the setting is the law, that's where the research really came in. And so this rubric was very much that the setting was real. So certain things that happen, certain cases that are discussed, or certain historical events, certain venues like Harvard Law School, that's real. The Supreme Court, that's real. Certain moments, or certain cases that are discussed, like Roe v. Wade, that's real, but just barely discussed, but it's in there. But if it's a fictional character, such as Sylvia is, she cannot interact and work on a real case. So if she is a fictional character, she's working on a fictional case. So it can't have them, they can't interact.
Right, even though it's going to kind of reflect the same kinds of challenges. Precisely. And that she was dealing with.
Exactly. Like one of the cases, the main case that she works on with pregnancy discrimination, that's not a real case because she's actually working on it, but it's an amalgamation of like 3 or 4 real cases that I studied and researched in order to pull some of those issues from.
Oh, very, very cool. I love that. And the other thing that I love about this book is the structure. So you have 4 parts. And each one has its own set of chapters, so they begin from chapter 1 for each part. And, so there's Brooklyn, there's Cambridge, there's New York, and there's DC. And so there's very clearly her childhood, her law school, schooling and education, where, she deals with a lot of where she sees a lot of the challenges of the world, I think, for the first time. There's New York, her working life as a lawyer, and then there's DC, all of the stuff that she goes through and becoming, confirmed as a justice of the Supreme Court. And so I wanted, and then it sort of, the end of the novel, I don't think this is giving anything away, to say that it really covers her childhood all the way up to when she is basically confirmed. So wanted to ask you, why those areas rather than her life actually as a Supreme Court justice? Because that, in some ways, that's like sort of the most glamorous, right?
I think you're right. It is the most glamorous, and I think that's the part that we see. I think that is a very visible part of their lives. So these people are in the public light when they are Supreme Court justices, and I wanted to know what got them there. I didn't really care about what they were once they were there. I was very interested in what got them there. What were their trials and tribulations? What did it look like before the point? Because that drama is, it is kind of also that idea of, in a lot of stories, and really kind of like storytelling 101 is, when they live happily ever after and then it's over. And not that I like that, but it's more along the lines of, okay, we know that, the premise is about the first woman on the Supreme Court and what does it look like to get there. And so it is pretty much, okay, what did it look like to get there? And if she was on the Supreme Court, then it would really be more about, it would be about the Supreme Court. And it might be very legally focused, and not to say that I don't talk about the law in the book at all. Certainly there's there's a lot of discussion about it, but I wanted to know about the home life, and I wanted to know what it took to get there.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And one of the other things that you do, I think, so well is just talk about the relationships, especially the female-centric relationships that she had, which of course, inform her later, jurisprudence and things like that. So, there's in the first part, there's her mother, of course, who dies early on, and then there's Mariana, who is the Holocaust survivor cousin, who kind of helps to raise her in some ways, and also helps her to sort of focus on the fact that justice and the law can be really, really important in shaping our society. And her roommate Linda, who's Black, who helps her to think about sort of, fighting versus not, which I'm so interested in hearing about that. And then her daughter. And so her relationships with all of these women and girls are so important. And I feel like that shapes so much of what she does and how she thinks about the law and how she thinks about the nuances of the challenges of being a mother and trying to have a family and a career, and also like dealing with colleagues who are men who might be attracted to her, things like that. So yeah, talk a little bit about those types of relationships, because I feel like that's the heart of the story for me.
Yeah, I think it was the heart for me as well. Is the relationships that she has with especially these three women in her life, or Mariana, Linda, and Aviva, her daughter. And, each one of them is it has a very different influence on her life. And I wanted to present different perspectives to her to show that she's different. Like Linda ends up becoming, I don't think this will give too much. She ends up becoming a journalist, and they fighting for equality in a very different way than she does. But showing Sylvia a different light, just as Mariana comes in as a Holocaust survivor and really helps define so much of who she is, and kind of coming from that kind of that idea of, okay, education's the one thing they can't take away from you, and you have to make sure what happened in Germany doesn't happen here. And so she has that kind of pressure on her from a very early age,
which is a huge pressure.
Huge burden.
Like,
yeah.
It's
a huge burden, and it's a huge pressure, but I think it helps direct her life in a way. But I think she doesn't know what to do with it when she's very young, and it comes in and out of her life in a way that really informs her. And also, she's able to look at conversations with a rabbi, for example, as looking at the Jewish text is very much looking at law, and that's what Mariana sees when she has conversations with Rabbi when she's shut out of her, for example, or she's shut out of her mother's minyan, her ability to mourn her own mother.
Yeah. By the way, this is totally. Anybody out there do spelling bee? New York Times spelling bee. Minyan was like the hardest word today.
Was it
FYI.
really? I didn't.
FYI, I didn't. I was doing it, and then I was like preparing your notes, and then I was like, I'm missing one word. I was like, I'm missing one word. What is this one word? That's a 6-letter word. And then I was like, minyan, that's what I'm missing. Okay, so it was very helpful for me today.
I'm glad.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk a little bit about the title and the cover. I'm sorry if I gave something away for those of you who haven't done it yet. Okay, so the title and the cover. The significance of the word of the title, the majority. I loved this so much. I feel like there are so many layers to that title. When did you come up with it? And who did you come up with it? Was it always your title?
My husband wants to be here and take credit for that, but he's not, so he's still in New York. But no, it was originally called Memoirs of a Justice, actually, for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah.
And we changed it.
Kind of like Memoirs of a Geisha or something.
Well,
you
that's
know, like,
exactly it.
Right?
So we're like, we should probably change it.
It's a fictional memoir, right?
It's a fictional memoir, but we also didn't want people to be confused if it was a novel or a memoir. It's fiction. But the significance of the title, it's multi-layered, and so it's
I love that.
Oh, thank you. It's so the majority opinion, and it becomes the law in Supreme Court opinions. So the majority, it has that meaning. But the other meaning is that women are the majority gender, but the minority in power. And so she has a lot of conversations about that throughout the entire book. And so she has and when the book starts, women are not the majority, but they're almost the majority. And her mother kind of talks to her about that, saying, okay, it's not true now, but it will be at some point. And so it really explores those two issues and those two themes throughout the whole book.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because when she goes to Harvard Law School, she is one of the first 9 women. So that significance of the number 9 is that actually true that the first group was 9, or did you pick that specifically just as a wink nod to the 9 justices?
I don't think that the first group of women were 9, but in my research in RBG's class there were 9.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And what about the cover? Tell us the story of the cover, because it's such a striking cover. And I think you did a social media post about it. I remember. And I just want you to talk about just what this means and how it came to be, and how much of a role did you play in coming up with it?
Like this, I'm so curious about your books too, because I feel like the cover conversation it's so big. It's like this moment that every writer has, like, when are they going to show you the art? What is it going to look like? Are you going to enjoy it? Are you going to? Is it reflect it? Yeah. And I feel like with each of my books, there's some have come easily, some you go back for multiple versions. Riverhead is my publisher, and they have an incredible art department.
They have such an amazing art department. I love their covers.
I love their covers so much. Yeah. This was the second idea. This was kind of the second concept, and the first concept was beautiful, but it was really focused on like the 60s, which it was. If the whole book was set at that point, it would have reflected it really nicely. But the book, it takes place over like 50 years.
Ooh, now I really want to see it.
I'll send it to you.
Okay, good.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to anybody who wants. Maybe I'll post it. But then they came back with this concept, and we tweaked it a little bit. But I loved it so much, and it just fit like you can look at it, you know exactly what it's about, but it has texture. It has some sort of movement, and I love the colors that they chose. So I don't know. I mean, I didn't design it, so I feel like I can't really take credit for it. But I love it.
Yeah, no, yeah. I love it. No, because it's also got sort of this feminine feel to it, but at the same time, the collar, like exactly what it is. It's very, very cool. And also it evokes RBG in a very specific way for me.
It's interesting because we sent them an image, because there were a few different collars, jabots, that they kind of sampled, and then I found a version that looked like this, and it was actually Sandra Day O'Connor's, and sent that picture to them. But I think people initially do think of RBG when they think of this, but it was from Sandra Day O'Connor's collar.
I think you said that in your post, right? I think you did. I think you did. And since you are in LA, can you talk a little bit about like any adaptations of this or your other works or anything like that that's in process?
Well, my first book was optioned, and that has gone through a whole kind of cycle, and now I've got the option back to that. So I'm excited to see what's happening. And this one, we're just gonna wait and see.
I feel like it's so.
There's a writer's strike right now, so everything's kind of
on
hold.
Not everything is on hold.
I don't
right
think anything.
now.
Yeah.
Everything is on hold right now, but I think that when that's over, I really think that this is going to be right for it, because I think we're so enamored with some of the women that this book is meant to evoke, and also it's a fascinating story in its own right. So
you're right.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to ask you about is the writing process. So I guess as somebody who's just finished her second book, this is your third. Does it get easier? Please tell me it does. And also, given that it is so different from your other books that you've worked on, do you feel like you've had to reinvent the process, or is the process the same and just the subject matter is different?
I think the process doesn't get any easier, but it is somewhat similar. Like, I feel like I write very much in fragments, and it doesn't matter if it's fiction or nonfiction. And I think you kind of mentioned something earlier about whether memoir and novel, and this is kind of a fictional memoir. And I teach memoir, actually, more than I teach fiction, which I love teaching memoir.
Oh, really?
It's really fun.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because it's like a group therapy session, right? Yeah, no, it is.
People have really interesting stories to
I've
tell.
taken personal essay and memoir classes, and they always become... they kind of devolve into group therapy sessions. Always, people
get very close. It's a really wonderful workshop, and I've been asked that question, and I feel like I write the books exactly the same. The only difference is that I'm making things up in fiction, as opposed to nonfiction, in which it's not. It's just I have to be accurate. I have to pull on the Rolodex of my memory, as opposed to kind of coming up with scenes. And so I approach them the same. I write in scene, and I try to somehow have to jigsaw puzzle it back together at the end.
So do you outline? Did you know what the structure was going to be? Did you know that it was going to sort of end at that point where you ended, or did you just start from the beginning of her childhood and sort of thought, okay, I'll see where I am when I reach 400 pages or whatever it is?
This book has gone through so many iterations. So I initially had, and I think I see a friend in here who had read a very, very early draft of this book when it had 8 sections or 6 sections. And I was trying to kind of cover a lot. Shout out to him, Saul Nadada, right over there. But I have so many, it covered so much territory that I feel like they ended up being little anecdotes. They could sit by themselves. And I didn't really get to get deep into any section of it. So
did they go past where it currently ends? Did it go past into the Supreme Court Justice's life?
I feel like I might have at some point, but very briefly. It was mostly, I want to say 75% of the process of the book has usually been up until it, but I feel like at one point maybe there was some back and forth about something going on present day, and was going, but it didn't work. I had to really basically focus on 4 sections to really make sure that I could get into it, and then I realized that was actually what was interesting.
Okay, well, that's very, very cool. Do we have any questions from the audience? If you do, please use the microphone here. Jeffrey. Yay.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm curious to know if you've ever met any of the Supreme Court justices, and if you have, what did you ask that justice? And if you haven't, who would you want to meet, past or present, and what would you ask?
Oh, I love that question.
So I haven't personally met a Supreme Court justice, but I have gone on a tour of the Supreme Court, again, courtesy of my lovely friend Saul over there. And it was a wonderful experience to actually be there in live oral argument, to see them. And it was the one day I had gone, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still alive, and she would be the person that I would want to meet, and maybe Benjamin Cardozo second. And Brandeis, so we're going with the 3 Jewish Supreme Court justices there. But we have, it was the first time she wasn't there. And I felt really devastated. I was like, I need to breathe the same air. I need to be in the same room as this person, this who I've idolized for so long. And it was one of the first times she wasn't there. And then I realized on my kind of the rest of the day, I was like, this is the best thing that could have happened, because I'm not writing about her. And I had to separate fact from fiction. I had to change what she looked like. I had to change the trajectory of all of her life. So once you get past like a handful of facts from the lives that are clearly inspiration, and she takes on a whole new pathway of her own. And for that reason, it's probably a good thing. Hope that answered your question. Yeah, thank you.
You mentioned that the title of your book, The Majority, relates to the divide, the issues between men and women. And I wonder if it also relates to the divide between Republicans and Democrats and Trump supporters and Trump detractors.
That's a great question. The question is really, is it kind of also a political divide, but like Republicans, Democrats, Trump and Trump detractors and everybody like that? And it wasn't really the intent of the book when I was doing it. It was really focused more on majority opinion, dissenting opinions, as well as, women being the majority or the supermajority, and not really about politics. So certainly I can see that politics are probably imbued within the book, and I suspect that people will read and interpret it however fits them and however they like. So it's very possible that people will read it that way. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so I definitely have more questions of my own. So we will continue, and if you have any questions, please come to the microphone. See, like now she's coming.
Hello.
Okay. Hello.
In the scene where Sylvia gets arrested, why didn't she speak when asked to speak?
Oh, I love that question. So
Such a great question. I love that.
So I'm going to do my best to answer this without giving too many spoilers. So the question is about when Sylvia gets arrested. As I already mentioned, she gets arrested for contempt of court, which is where her nickname really comes from. And a lot of that she goes through, and she talks to Macklow, her professor, and kind of when she goes back to him and kind of questions herself, why is she doing this? Why did she not speak up? And she's questioning and asking herself the exact same question. Why didn't I speak? And I think that she's very young, and it was a split-second decision that kind of led her into kind of a little bit of this bleeding heart, like, I want to help that person, and I know that's not what I'm here for, and I know that's not what my job is. And she knows that she messed up, and she's constantly struggling with that. And so I think it takes her developing more experience as a lawyer, more experience in life, to realize, okay, this is my job, to focus on the job and somehow to take emotion out of it, which is, I think, is a really hard thing to do when you're younger, and when you're learning. And so it's something that really haunts her, I think, for the rest of her life, internally and certainly externally.
And I also think that it goes to the theme of, how women can be different from men, especially back then, and how we're taught. I was just listening to this really fascinating interview today on the podcast with Adrienne Brodeur and her latest novel, which I don't know if you've had the chance to read. It's really beautiful, and because her first was a memoir also, and this is her first novel. And she said that the inspiration for her latest novel, Little Monsters, came from the fact that she's been having this in real life, for her having the same dream for the longest time. And in the dream, it's different situations involving different people, but she is always trying to desperately to give a message to someone in the dream, and she cannot speak. And that lack of, that inability to speak made her wonder what it is about being a woman that makes it so hard for us to say things directly, especially things that are hard and that might be troubling to other people. And so that, and when I was listening to that today, I was thinking about, obviously, about our coming conversation. I thought about that too for that particular scene. So I'm so glad that you asked it. Thank you.
That's so interesting, and I think that makes so much sense. I think that
Right?
we think that we know how we're going to respond to something when we're in that position, and we don't. I mean, I feel like I tell my children this, I tell myself this. I always think, oh, who would I have been in this time in history? Who would I be now? You know, and you think you're going to be you think you're going to answer a certain way, but until you're put on the spot, you don't know, and then you have social norms beating down on
The
you.
social
for
norms
years.
are huge, right? Yeah, no, definitely. And, you know, and you're not supposed to be confrontational. And yet, as lawyers, we are taught that we have to be. You have to be confrontational. I mean, in a sense, that's one of our jobs, is to be an effective advocate. In order to do that, you have to say the uncomfortable truths. Yeah. So, yes.
Hey there, thank you for being here. My question is about the process of writing. So you have the idea to write this book, and you're probably talking to people, reading a ton, and then you're staring at a blank page. So what's your process to kind of just start putting things on paper, and then do you find that stuff tends to stick, or that it takes a few iterations of it?
I love the process conversation. It always takes a million iterations. Like when I feel like this book in particular had hundreds of drafts, and went through such a history of rewriting this book, changing it. I changed agents with this book. I changed publishers with this book. And so, you know, I think you really have to keep focusing on and thinking about, okay, this is what I want to do. This is I believe in this book, and this is why. I think when you're staring at I feel like it depends on where you are in your life. Like, right, like during COVID, it's a different process than it would be without COVID. When you're dealing with kids at home, when you're, you know, wherever you are. But in a perfect world, if I'm like at a writing residency, or, you know, I just have a full day to write, I like to have a word count. Try to get some words down on a page. And I make sure that I finish my writing day kind of mid-sentence, mid-paragraph, but sometimes even mid-sentence. Because then I know that when I wake up the next day and I'm staring and I open my computer, I'm in the middle of something. I'm not having to start from scratch. I'm not having to start and figure out how is this sentence going to start, or how is this scene going to start. So even if I'm like kind of finishing something, and I'm exhausted, I want to move on, and I want to close my computer or do something else, I'll try to start the next scene and then close my computer.
That's so smart, and I tried that, and it utterly failed for me. So Peter Heller, I remember, told me when I was on tour for my first book, he told me, this is my biggest gift that I can give to you. And he said, because we were having drinks late at night, and he was like, okay, I have to go because I have to get up early tomorrow and like write. And I was like, write? You're in the middle of tour. What are you talking about writing? And he was like, no, I write 2 hours every day, no more and no less. And he said at the end of 2 hours, he just stops, and he sets an alarm or whatever, and he stops no matter where he is. Like if he's mid-thought, mid-sentence, he just stops. And I was like, that sounds brilliant, just like what you were talking about.
Fascinated.
And so I was like, okay, I'm totally doing this. And I tried it, and this is what happened. So the alarm went off, and I was like, okay, I'm stopping. So I stopped, and I closed my laptop or whatever. And then the next day I came back, and I could not remember the brilliant idea that I had, right? Brilliant, right? But still, that I was like, oh my God, I'm sure that I must have had a brilliant idea on how to, like how to wrap up the scene or whatever. And I could not remember it for the life of me. And so I was like, why didn't I just write it down? Why didn't I take 30 more seconds to write it down? And so I spent the entire 2 hours the next day trying to figure out the next like sentence or half sentence that I had been thinking of that was in my head. And convinced, of course, I'm sure it wasn't brilliant, but convinced that it was brilliant. And
it was lost.
And it was lost forever, and I could never get it back. And from then on, I was like, I am never doing this again.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I know. Isn't it interesting?
Oh my God, I love that.
I know. I think that if you train your mind
Yeah.
to do it, then you can probably get to it. And next time I did it, I would probably like really try hard to remember and whatever. But it that one time of not being able to remember a half sentence for 2 hours traumatized me so much that I was like, never again.
That will not be in your process then.
No, definitely not.
But that's interesting. 2 hours, not a second. Wow.
Yeah, he's
That's
like,
fascinating.
and he says that everyone that he's told this to, except for me, has loved it, and it's really, really, really enormously helped their writing process. So I am gonna try it again because this is, because it's just too intriguing, right?
I feel like I have to try it now.
Totally.
Yeah, I love that.
So you said that you wrote this book over a period of years, and I imagine that it's possible that over that time period, your relationship with motherhood may have evolved, and your thoughts about the relationship between motherhood and professional careers, may have evolved as well. And over those iterations and drafts, that may have, in some ways, gotten layered into the story. So I'm curious, it's a two-part question, both how you feel that impacted the final draft and, what came through your own evolution, and also what message you might have, for a young child, for your daughter, for instance, about, a thesis statement about motherhood and career, given that this is so much of a subject of your book.
I think that the book is really my thesis statement on motherhood and ambition, and very much kind of how we struggle and how we shouldn't struggle. But I think, Sylvia talks about this at some point with Aviva and with Joe, her husband, and kind of this idea of at the end of a movie, there's always the father that comes in and gets to have like the big revelation, I was a workaholic, but it was all for you, and everything's okay now. And it's not. And I think that it's this idea we're looking at it, and it's just different. And I think as soon as we acknowledge the differences, then there will be more equity. Because, I used to go, like with my last couple of books, when I was out on events and on tour, there was almost not a single event that somebody came to where somebody did not ask me who was watching my kids. And I had like a brand new baby with the first one and a brand new baby with the second one. And people didn't really ask me that when I was practicing law, understandably, hopefully, but why would they ask me that as a writer as well? And I used to be all like with don't ask me that unless you're asking the male novelist, don't do that. But the reality is, okay, ask me, but ask the male novelist too. Like, let's elevate it. Let's bring motherhood and parenthood and fatherhood into the conversation. Make it a part of this. Like, my kids are with me on book tour, except for DC, because we're just here for one night. And it's been really exciting to have them be in the audience, them asking questions, them seeing me at work, not just in my home office in my sweats and things like that. And so I think part of it is, let's have this conversation. Let's see men parenting just as much as we're seeing women parenting. And I think that is a way to help move forward.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's really interesting, the questions that you're raising about careers, because we also want to raise questions of, mothers and what it's like to what it means to be a good mother, because she had such a complicated relationship with her own mother too. Absolutely. So that's a huge part of it too. Yes.
So a lot of the characters in your book, besides mothers, are outsiders and described as outsiders. And a lot of the messages that I'm only halfway through, full disclosure, this may be resolved, are told that in order to get ahead, in order to become part of the majority, you have to work within the system, and that you have to be part of it. You can't buck the system. You've got to work within. I'm just wondering how you feel about that, and whether that still applies today, or is it still something that, that you can't break barriers and kind of knock down the door, you've got to kind of be let in?
Oh, that's a great question. Whether we have to work within or outside the system.
And also that I'm going to piggy on to that, my question that I was alluding to earlier about her roommate, Linda, and she chooses a different way of sort of fighting the system than Sylvia does. So yes, and so your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't think that you can change the system only from the inside out at all. I think that there's so many ways of changing the system and making progress. There's infinite ways, and I think that you have to find the way, if that's something you want to do, you have to find the way that suits you, that fits your personality, that fits your drive, that fits everything that defines you. And so, the line that you mentioned is kind of when Linda and Sylvia are talking about from the inside out, from the outside in, and doing it from different ways, whether it's professionally, whether it's personally, whether it's creatively. I started this book kind of thinking, well, so much of literature and film is written by people, are written about like women who have huge real estate and huge personalities and are outside doing everything from the outside in. And people like Sandra Day O'Connor, people like Ruth Bader, so a lot of these people are doing it from the inside out. And they're quiet. And it's internalized and it's introspective. And I think that both are needed. But I don't think that the people quietly, working at their desks and figuring out how to change the laws their stories aren't being told as much because it's not as dramatic, right? It's not as exciting. It's more exciting to see somebody fighting and marching in the streets.
Yeah, and also it's not loud. It's not as loud.
Yeah, it's not loud. And I think both stories are not just both those stories, but any form of story in which you're kind of changing system, they're all important. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Just going back to the earlier thought about motherhood, Sylvia was obviously a really good communicator, right? She won these amazing cases. Why did she have such a hard time communicating with her daughter? Or if there isn't a why, where did that come from?
I think that there's probably a lot of ways to answer that question, and I think this isn't true for everybody, but for Sylvia at least, she knew how to communicate on a larger scale. And she knew how to make a difference on a larger scale, but not in the intimate way. And whether it's because she grew up really without having her own mother for part of it, whether she was constantly looking for mother figures and not necessarily having a model, I think that all of these factors kind of make a difference in her trajectory and help her define kind of, what she struggles with. And I think it's also, even the relationship with the daughter, kind of, they say, okay, well, stop talking about it. It's another time. That's an excuse. We can't keep saying, well, it was a different time, because I think we hear this and we'll hear this till the end of time. Our kids are going to be like, well, the 2000s, the 2020, that was a different time. And but it was, and I think that for her time frame, she struggled and she didn't know what to do. And so I think that she kind of learned it after the fact, which is sad, for her child, and for the people around her.
Okay, I know I said one last question, but I have one last question. I'd love to know what you're working on next.
Ooh, I am toggling between two different novels, and I'm not sure which way to go. And this, because I've been writing a lot of short stories as well, because I had so much, I revised this novel over so many years, so I would put it down and I couldn't really commit to a new novel, so I would write short stories. But the two books that I'm really toggling between, one is extremely, I don't even know, one is like super historical, and then one is speculative. So even though this is technically historical, I feel like it's more like I would write a scene and then something like that would happen in real life, like after I wrote it, and I was like, I have to go back and change it and rewrite it again. And so I'm interested in looking outside of the near historical time frame next.
Well, thank you so
you.
much for this wonderful conversation. Thank you,
Oh,
everybody, for coming
thank
out.
you.
Thank you to Politics and Prose.
I'm going to take a picture of everybody, of this beautiful audience, before
Yeah.
we move. So if everyone could smile. Awesome. Thank you so much.
And please buy a copy of The Majority. And, from Politics and Prose is hosting this. Thank you so much.
Thank you all
Bye.
so much. Thank you, Angie.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much for coming out.